A shrewd old lion became too aged to hunt for food by force, and was thus compelled to resort to deceit. The king of beasts returned to his den and lay down there, feigning illness and taking care that his sickness be publicly known. One by one, the beasts came to the lion to express their sorrow for the king. As each one entered the lion's den, the lion devoured them. Many beasts disappeared, and before long the fox realized the lion's trickery. When the fox presented himself to the lion, he stood on the outside of the cave at a respectful distance and asked the king how he was. "I am very middling," replied the lion. "But why do you stand so far? Please, enter within and talk with me." "No, thank you," said the fox. "I notice there are many prints of feet entering your cave, but I see no trace of any returning." Moral of the story: he is wise who is warned by the misfortunes of others. Critical thinking is a framework that encourages us to learn from the mistakes of others.
Welcome back. In this episode, we will be looking at a few more reasoning flaws. Let's begin with one called the red herring reasoning flaw. This example illustrates how the flaw works. Two ladies are discussing a situation. The first lady, Arzu, says, "We really have to win the new business from the electronics factory down the road if we're going to survive. My fear is that we are losing out to our competitors. So let's meet and discuss a strategy on how we can win this business." The second lady, Kohinoor, says, "Yes, we have to plan what kind of new furniture we're going to need when we win the new business. Should we buy workstations or should we buy individual desks?" Sounds like a silly example, because the issue at hand is how to win business from the electronics factory. But what's happened is a red herring has been thrown into the scene, and the red herring is, what kind of furniture should we buy? A red herring is a flaw that is used to divert attention from the real issue. And typically the way it works is this. Topic A is being discussed. Topic B is introduced into the argument as if it is relevant to topic A, although it's not. Through this, topic A is dropped and topic B is discussed instead. This is a method of diverting attention from the real issue to another issue which is not so important. It's a red herring flaw. You see it apparent in this example too. This is a letter written to a consumer. The letter says that we write to inform you that we have no choice but to increase water rates by 3% next month. Situation is not avoidable because our currency has lost considerable value against other currencies, and the price of food items has increased also, and that the water utilities company will attempt to restore the water rates once the situation improves. You see a red herring in work here. The issue at hand is water rates are going up by 3%. The red herring which has been thrown in is the currency has lost value, food prices have gone up. Now you need to ask yourself, is there a relationship between currency losing value, food prices going up, and the fact that water rates have gone up? If that link is not apparent, and if that link does not exist, this is a red herring.
'Tis the mind that makes the body rich.
Another reasoning flaw is called begging the question. Let's look at this example to illustrate how this flaw works. We have here a magazine article which says that programmed learning texts are more effective for learning. This is because learning is greatly assisted by material that's presented in a step-by-step fashion. Sounds entirely logical, sounds completely reasonable. Until you look at several things in the argument. Firstly, programmed learning. It says that programmed learning texts are more effective. What's programmed learning? Programmed learning is a step-by-step procedure. The article concludes by saying, this is because learning is greatly assisted by material that is presented in a step-by-step fashion. Now, we saw earlier that programmed learning is actually step-by-step fashion. So what we have in this argument is the conclusion, which is step-by-step procedure is better for learning, is exactly the same as the reason, which is programmed learning texts are more effective for learning, but only the words have changed. You have a situation here where the reason and the conclusion are identical, but just expressed in different words. This is a reasoning flaw. No reason has been presented at all for the conclusion. Just like this example, where a person has gone for an interview, and the interviewer says, "Your resume looks impressive, but I need someone to vouch for you." And the interviewee says, "Not a problem, Andy will be able to give a reference for me. He knows me well." And the interviewer questions, "But how do I know that Andy is trustworthy? How do I know that I can rely on what he says about you?" And the interviewee says, "Well, I can vouch for Andy." You have the same situation here where the reason and the conclusion are identical. This is called begging the question, where if we say that X is true, then the evidence for the claim is that X is true. Now, that's hardly an argument. It goes around in a circle. Hence, begging the question is also sometimes known as a circular reasoning flaw, where the reason and the conclusion are basically in a circle. We see the same flaw in this example, where a man says UFOs exist, unidentified flying objects or UFOs exist because what I saw can only be a UFO. We have a situation where the reason and the conclusion are exactly the same, and the conclusion is not supported by any reasons whatsoever. This is begging the question reasoning flaw. Similar to this example here, which says that it's advantageous to allow the mass media to keep their sources confidential. This is highly conducive to the interests of the whole community, as private individuals should have the privilege of providing information to the media without being identified. The conclusion is that confidentiality of informants is important. And the reason that it's using for that conclusion is their identity should be kept secret. You can see that the conclusion, which is confidentiality, is the same as the reason, which is should be kept secret. So the conclusion is the same as the reason, is the same as the conclusion. A circular reasoning flaw, or begging the question reasoning flaw. The next reasoning flaw is called burden of proof. Let's use this example to see how the reasoning flaw works. Article says UFOs must exist because no one has been able to prove that they do not exist. What you see here is a shift in the burden of proof. Ordinarily, the burden of proof rests on the person making the claim. But a flaw occurs when this burden is shifted to another party, which is what has happened here. That UFOs exist because no one has been able to show that they do not. So the burden of proof has moved from the person to other parties. You see the same reasoning in this example. You are guilty. If you want us to believe that you are not, you must prove your innocence. Now, burden of proof has again shifted from the prosecution to the person being charged. In a court of law, the burden of proof rests on proving the guilt, not the innocence of the person involved. We see same line of reasoning in this example also. Since the class has no questions concerning the topics discussed, the class is ready for a test. Not necessarily at all. The burden of proof has shifted. We see the same reasoning flaw in this argument here, in a newspaper article, which says that black holes don't exist. After all, we haven't found a single black hole yet. Now, the fact that no black hole has been found doesn't mean that they do not exist. The burden of proof has been shifted. This is a reasoning flaw. Another reasoning flaw is the personal incredulity flaw. Let's look at an example to see how this flaw manifests. We have here a person who says, I cannot imagine or understand how something as complex as evolution could come about. Therefore, it cannot be true. Another example of a car. A person says, I've never heard of this car. I'm sure it doesn't exist. If it did exist, I would have heard about it. In both cases, what we have is an example of the personal incredulity flaw. This flaw exists or manifests when someone believes that a particular situation is not true or cannot exist because the person cannot understand it, doesn't know about it, or cannot imagine it. So it's argued from a personal perspective. If I don't know about it, if I can't understand it, if I can't imagine it, it's not true, it doesn't exist. This is a reasoning flaw. Let's look at a third example, where a person says that I can't imagine anyone working so hard to complete their bachelor's degree in 12 months. She must be lying. I do not believe her because I can't imagine anyone working that hard. This is the personal incredulity reasoning flaw. You see the same reasoning flaw in this example, where two boys are having a conversation. First boy says, "You got 12 distinctions in your examination? I don't believe it. I only got 5. You must have cheated." And the second boy says, "No, I did not. I worked hard for my 12 distinctions." First boy then remarks, "But you were out playing football with me half the time, and you were also actively involved in a lot of extracurricular activities in the school. I don't believe that anyone can get 12 distinctions without studying all day and night." What we have here is a situation of the first boy not believing something because he can't imagine it, he can't see it. Because he can't imagine it and he can't see it, his reasoning is, it can't be true. This is another example of the flaw. Let's look at the next reasoning flaw, called the moving goalposts flaw. Let's use this example to illustrate how this reasoning flaw works. We have two individuals here. We have Zaman and we have Idris. Zaman says, "If you take vitamin C, you will never catch a cold. I have been taking vitamin C for years." Now Idris retorts by saying, "But you caught a cold last month." And Zaman says, "Yes, but it would have been much worse if I had not been taking vitamin C for years." You may be able to detect a reasoning flaw. Let's continue with a second example and it will become apparent. We have two roommates arguing over housework. First roommate says, "I do more cleaning than you do. That is not right. We should be doing an equal amount of work." Second roommate says, "Well, let's record everything that we do for 1 week. Then we'll know the real situation. We'll know whether you do more work or I do, or both of us do equal amount of work. So let's write it all down." After a week, the first roommate comes back and says, "Well, we've been keeping a record of what both of us have been doing, and the record shows that I do more cleaning up than you do." Now, second roommate now says, "Well, that's only fair. After all, my course is harder than yours." Can you see what's happened here? The goalposts have moved in both the examples. Evidence is demanded. The evidence is presented. But what happens is another set of criteria is imposed to make it harder for the arguer to win the game. This is also called raising the bar or changing the rules halfway. This is a reasoning flaw.
Thinkers are as scarce as gold, but he whose thoughts embrace all his subject, pursues it uninterruptedly and fearless of consequences, is a diamond of enormous size.
The next flaw is one called the false continuum reasoning flaw. This is how it works. A student says that you can't say that I'm a poor student, although my marks are the lowest in the whole school. There must be others who are worse than me, in other schools, in the city, in the whole country, around the world. I can't be a poor student. There must be others who are poorer than me. Another example. Person says, "You are not tall. You are just taller than most other people. Many others around the world are likely to be taller than you. So you can't claim to be tall because you're not the tallest." Now this is a reasoning flaw. This is the false continuum reasoning flaw, which argues that everything is on a continuum. It's on a line. There is no break between the line. Because of this continuum, there are no extremes or ends. And because of this, everything is relative. Nothing is fixed, everything is relative, because there is no end to the continuum. While everything is relative in life, but just because there are no clear demarcation lines between the extremes, it doesn't mean that the extremes or the ends are not real or are not meaningful. Going back to our two earlier examples, while it may be true that the student may not be the poorest in the whole world or the whole country or the whole city, the fact still remains that that student is a poor student in the school. That is still important and that is still meaningful. So just because there is a continuum, it doesn't make the extremes less meaningful. Take this example of a person talking to Julie and saying, "How can you say you are healthy? You don't know if others are healthier than you." Same argument, same reasoning flaw. It may be true that there are others who are healthier than Julie, but that doesn't mean that Julie is not healthy. So while everything is relative, the extremes in their end are also important and meaningful. We can never be sure of anything until complete information is available, but it does not mean that we can ignore the realness of the present situation. Why the obsession with reasoning flaws? Why are we so interested in finding flaws in reasons or arguments that we use? It's because reasoning flaws take us away from the real solutions to problems. In today's world, the successful individual is one who can identify the real causes of a problem and solve them. This is a quality that employers look for. It's an essential quality in today's globalized world, problem solving. If we cannot identify the flaws that are used in reasonings and arguments that are used to persuade us, we will inevitably make the wrong decision, simply because the information that we are using to make the decision is not complete, it's not clear, it's not unquestionable, it's ambiguous, may be outrightly faulty. Because of this, the emphasis on detecting reasoning flaws is a strong one, and one that is demanded by the globalized workforce.